All right, so today we're going to talk about something fascinating and maybe a little bit scary. We're diving into the invisible forces that are constantly shaping our decisions, often without us even having a clue. We're talking about the science of influence and really how to hack the human brain. I mean, think about it for a second. Have you ever bought something and immediately regretted it? Or found yourself giving in during an argument, even though you knew you were right? Maybe you just kind of went along with a belief because, well, everyone else seemed to believe it. It turns out those moments, they're not just random. They're the result of very specific psychological triggers being pulled. So, to really get a handle on these triggers, we're looking at the work of a guy named Chase Hughes. And listen, this isn't some academic in an ivory tower. This guy is the real deal. He spent 20 years in U.S. military intelligence. Now he trains government agencies. We're talking serious operators in behavior science, interrogation, and influence. He's basically dedicated his entire life to finding, the little loopholes in our brain's programming. All right, so section 1. To really get how influence works, we've got to start with two really foundational psychological experiments. When you put them together, they reveal some powerful and honestly kind of terrifying things about the basic wiring of our brains. So, first up, let's talk about a really famous experiment from back in the 1950s. It was run by a guy named Dr. Solomon Asch, and he was trying to answer a really simple but deep question. Just how strong is group pressure? Strong enough to make us literally doubt what we're seeing with our own two eyes? Okay, so the setup was super simple. You've got one real test subject in a room, but they think everyone else is a test subject too. In reality, they're all actors. And they're all shown a card with a line on it, and then another card with 3 lines, labeled A, B, and C. The task? Just say which of the 3 lines matches the first one. It's a no-brainer, right? The answer is totally obvious. But here's the twist. One by one, the actors all confidently pick the wrong line. So when it's finally the real person's turn, what do you think happened? An absolutely shocking number of them just caved. They ignored the clear evidence from their own eyes and just went along with the group's wrong answer. It's just this incredible demonstration of how deep our need to conform really goes. So if that Asch experiment showed us our desire to fit in with the crowd, well, the Milgram experiment from 1962, that one revealed something way, way more disturbing. This one's all about our obedience to authority. Okay, so in this experiment, you have regular, ordinary people who are told by a guy in a lab coat, an authority figure, to give electric shocks to another person in a different room. Every time that person gets a question wrong, the shock gets stronger, and they can hear everything. They hear the person screaming, they hear them begging to stop, they hear them complaining about a heart condition, and then eventually, just silence. Now, before they ran this, psychologists predicted that maybe 1% of people, the real psychopaths, would go all the way. But the reality? 67%. 2/3 of ordinary people delivered the final 450-volt shock, which was clearly marked as a fatal dose, just because a guy in a lab coat told them to. So what on earth do we take away from these pretty chilling experiments? Well, our source, Chase Hughes, boils it all down to a really powerful, simple formula. Novelty plus authority. Think about it. In both cases, the participants were in a totally new, unexpected situation they had zero mental script for. That's the novelty. And in both cases, there was a clear, confident authority figure giving the instructions. Hughes says that when those two things are present, our critical thinking just short circuits. Our ancient fight or flight brain takes the wheel, and the part of us that questions things just goes quiet. All right, section 2. Now we're going to see how these principles jump out of the laboratory and into the real world, where the stakes get a whole lot higher. So Hughes actually went and studied cult recruiters to figure out their playbook. And what he found was that they all follow this surprisingly similar 2-step pattern. Step 1 is to get the target to deviate from their baseline. So they'll get you to do something a little outside your normal social rules, like maybe complain or even curse about your boss. It seems small, but doing that instantly activates this kind of "we're friends" script in your brain. Then, bam, step 2. They lock in your identity. They'll say something like, there are really two kinds of people. There are the people who just let life happen to them, and then there are people who take action. You really strike me as someone who takes action. Once you agree with that, and who wouldn't, they've got you. They can start predicting and steering your behavior because you'll want to stay consistent with that new identity. And this quote from Hughes really nails his whole philosophy. He says he's not really learning about interrogation or cult recruiting. He's just learning where the little loopholes in the brain are. He's not interested in the surface-level tactics of one group or another. He's going deeper, to the fundamental vulnerabilities in our psychology. It's not about magic tricks. It's about finding the exploits, the bugs, in the operating system that's running inside all of our heads. And according to Hughes, this hunt for psychological loopholes led governments down a pretty dark road. He argues that these very same principles became the foundation for infamous CIA programs like MKUltra. And their goal was something straight out of a spy movie. They wanted to know if they could create a real-life Manchurian candidate. A person who could be programmed to become an assassin without any memory or knowledge of what they'd done. And the source points out, there's a pretty wild documented history of this kind of research. Back in the 50s, you had the CIA's Operation Midnight Climax, where they literally ran brothels just to secretly dose people with LSD and watch what happened. At the same time, American POWs coming back from the Korean War seemed to have been brainwashed, and that kicked off a full-blown psychological arms race. Then up in Canada in the 60s, you had doctors using something called psychic driving on their own unsuspecting patients, making them listen to looped tapes for hours on end. And Hughes believes that all of this research, it all culminated in 1968 with what he argues was the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy by a mind-controlled Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, Section 3. Now, all this stuff might sound like it's from some old Cold War spy thriller, right? But these techniques are actually more relevant today than they have ever been. And it's all thanks to that little device that's probably in your pocket right now. Remember that Ash experiment we talked about with the lines on the card? The one about conforming to the group? Well, social media basically puts that experiment on steroids, on a global scale. Hughes brings up this idea of the tyranny of the fringe. What that means is that an algorithm can grab a tiny but very loud group of people and then, using bots and just pure amplification, make it look like a massive popular movement. It creates this incredibly powerful but totally fake sense of social proof. The thing is, our social media feeds are literally engineered to exploit our psychology. They use bots and likes to create a fake sense of tribal agreement. They're designed to trap us in echo chambers where our identity becomes way more important than any actual ideas. And they leverage our #1 biological fear, public judgment, to keep us all in line. And then there's this other thing Hughes points to, a classic hypnosis technique called fractionation. Just think about your feed for a second. You see a cute puppy video, you feel good. Then you see an infuriating political post, you feel angry. Then a funny meme, you laugh. That constant up and down emotional roller coaster, he argues that it's not an accident. It systematically breaks down your critical thinking over time, making you more and more open to suggestion. Now, as an example of modern propaganda, the source points to this headline from the LA Times. And in his analysis, this is a perfect example of these principles in action. He says it combines the authority of a major newspaper with some pretty intense tribal shaming. The message it sends, he argues, is crystal clear. This is what happens to you if you step outside the approved narrative. Hughes has a military term for this kind of thing, a PSYOP, which stands for psychological operation. And the key thing to understand is that this isn't just a bunch of random people yelling at each other online. A PSYOP is an intentional, large-scale operation that uses propaganda and psychological tactics to influence the emotions, the motives, and ultimately the behavior of a whole population. So the big question is, how would you even know if you're in the middle of a psychological operation? Well, Hughes offers a really simple litmus test. He says if you see an official narrative or an idea that is so fragile that credible people, doctors, scientists, actual experts, are being silenced or deplatformed just for questioning it, then there's a very good chance you're looking at a PSYOP. All right, Section 4. So we've seen all the scary stuff. The big question now is, what do we do about it? How do we defend ourselves? This brings us to our final and maybe most important section, How to build your own mental firewall. Okay, and this right here might be the single most critical lesson of all. Hughes calls it the firewall illusion. And what is that? It's that little voice in your head that says, oh, this stuff is interesting, but it wouldn't work on me. I'm too smart. I'm too aware. According to Hughes, the second you think you're immune to this stuff, that's the exact moment you become the easiest, most vulnerable target there is. And this really gets to the core of the problem, doesn't it? Our brains, for all their wonders, haven't had a major software update in about 200,000 years. We are running on ancient programming. But we are now facing off against trillion-dollar technologies with algorithms that have been specifically designed for one thing and one thing only, to find and exploit every single one of our psychological bugs. It's a massive mismatch. And right now, we're on the losing side of that battle. So I'll just leave you with this one final thought. In an age of algorithms and these artificial online tribes, when you look at the groups that you belong to, politically, socially, whatever it is, how can you be absolutely sure that the group you feel a part of is even real?